Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about 100 different ways they lie to you about sugar. Isn't it interesting how much sweet is a part of our language? So if something great happens to you, then you probably react with, oh, sweet. If you care for someone, you call them sweetie or honey. When grandma wants a kiss on the cheek, she says, come here, give me some sugar. If you get a bargain of some sort, then you probably call it a sweet deal. And then, of course, after people get married, they go on a honeymoon. And humans certainly love sweets. It's even tied into our survival because the sweet taste is hardwired into your system, into your brain, into the reward centers in the brain. So we're supposed to love sweet and we're supposed to love sugar. And the reason is that if we can identify sweet things, then we can raise blood sugar. And with that higher blood sugar, we release a hormone called insulin. And this insulin is a fat storing hormone. And this is a great advantage. Back in the days when we had such a thing as feast and famine, meaning that there were different times of the year where we had more or less food, then it was a survival mechanism to appreciate sweet, to release insulin, and to store some extra fat during the time of year where we had a little extra. So we could store the excess food as fat, and then when there wasn't so much food, we had something to live off. But when was the last time that you had a famine? Honestly, have you ever gone into a grocery store and they said, no, sorry, we don't have anything sweet in the store. We only have meat and eggs and cheese and vegetables. We don't have any processed foods. We don't have any cookies, no candy, no soda, nothing like that. I'm willing to bet that has not happened in your lifetime. And not only that, but the sweetest foods, the most processed foods are also these days the cheapest and the most abundant. There's thousands of different stock keeping items in the average grocery store, and we have access to them year round. 365 days, there is never a shortage. So the very mechanism, the appreciation, the drive to look for sweets that helped our ancestors survive has now come back to bite us because we changed the rules. And this leads us to lie number one, because we hear that sugar is natural. It's in so many different foods, and it occurs in fruit. And when we go back and compare to our ancestors, they had fruit and they had honey. And all of these things are true, but it's about quantity and the form that we get the sugar in. So our ancestors never had anything processed or isolated. It was always in small quantities packed inside the food with other things such as fat and fiber and cell walls and so forth. But when we refine it and process it, we change the rules, and then they go on to add it to thousands of different products, and there's nothing natural about that. As a result, there's no limit to how much we can get. And now we eat 126 grams per person per day in the United States. And that's about 30 teaspoons per day. And here's where most people now, they're going to go, oh, that's not me. That must be somebody else, because I certainly don't have a package of sugar and take 30 teaspoons and pour it onto my food. I might use 2 or 3 or 5 in my coffee, but I don't do anything like that. But what we're talking about here is all forms of added sweeteners. We're talking sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and we're talking about cookies and salad dressings and barbecue sauce and ketchup and all the different forms. We get it. And this adds up to 126 grams, or about 100 pounds per person per year. It's about 45 kilos. And in my opinion, that's probably about 10 times more than anybody should have on a regular basis. Lie number two is that fat is the bad guy. For the last 50 to 70 years, we blamed every health condition on fat. They say that obesity and diabetes and heart disease, it's all because you eat too much fat. But if you watch any of my videos, you know it's abundantly clear that it's the high levels of insulin resulting from high consumption of sugar that is responsible for all those conditions. And fat is actually neutral. It does not stimulate insulin, so it cannot by itself cause any of those conditions. But from a food manufacturer's perspective, this lie is a dream come true, because now they can make all of these different low-fat, high-sugar foods. And that's perfect from a business standpoint, because you can stuff yourself full of low-fat, high-sugar, and an hour later, you are hungry again. And not only that, but they can label them guilt-free and heart-healthy. So now you can feel good about stuffing yourself and overeating and becoming a diabetic. Lie number 3 is that white sugar, processed sugar, added sugar is really, really bad. And that's why they have to put it on the label separately as added sugar. Everyone agrees that that's a bad thing. We need to limit it. But those same people then go on to say that complex carbs are really good. You should eat at least half, up to 60-70% of all your calories from complex carbs. And that's a huge fallacy, because the two are not that different. That yes, complex carbs are slightly better. Some of them have a little bit of fiber, but for the most part, they are very much alike, and they have very similar addictive properties. They both spike blood sugar and they trigger pleasure receptors in the brain. And this is clearly evident if you think about all of the comfort foods that typically they're going to be things like mac and cheese and bread and sandwiches, and they're going to be high in sugar and carbs. Now let's clear this up once and for all. Here's all you need to know about carbohydrates. The basic unit of a carbohydrate is a 6-carbon ring called glucose. This is what becomes blood sugar. This is what we use for energy in every one of our cells, but it is not the preferred fuel. It's the fuel that has to be used up when blood sugar gets too high. If we link this together with another molecule called fructose, which is similar, but it has 5 carbons in a ring plus another carbon, so it still has 6 carbons. Now this is called sugar, table sugar or sucrose. And this bond here, we have enzymes, sucrase, to break this into 2, and now we have 2 separate rings, and one becomes blood sugar and the other goes to the liver for further processing and usually gets turned into fat. So that's the basic sugar. But now if we take these glucose molecules and we go into the plant kingdom and we talk about starches, then plants will link these together with the same exact link, and it will do this over and over and over. You can link hundreds or thousands, you can branch them out in trees, and now it's called a starch. So the same people who say that sugar is really, really bad, they say that starch is really, really good. You should eat as little of this as possible, but they say you should eat as much of this as possible. And the difference is very, very slight. This one tastes sweeter because it's a smaller molecule, but the end result is very much the same, that you break these links up and each ring becomes a monosaccharide, a simple sugar that goes right into the bloodstream. So when they talk about complex carbs, they're often saying that white bread is really bad, but whole grain bread is really good because it has some fiber. And the difference is very, very slight. It does have some fiber. Whole grain is slightly better, but it's not as big of a difference as what they say. And here is what fiber looks like. It's the same basic components, but the link is twisted the other way. And now you don't have the enzyme to break it apart, but your gut bacteria do. So this is the real reason, and really the only reason, that you want to eat some carbohydrates. But you don't want the starchy kind or the sugary kind. You want the ones with fiber, and they're called non-starchy vegetables. They're leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, etc. And it doesn't mean that you can never have any starch. It depends on how insulin resistant you are, how tolerant your body is of carbohydrate. But if you have a weight problem or a diabetes problem, then this is not the kind of food that you want to eat. You do not want to eat starches, but it's still okay to have some fiber, some vegetables, some plant food that are primarily fiber and not so much starch or sugar. Lie number 4 is that high fructose corn syrup is the worst of all sweeteners. It is the devil. And the problem with this, I'm not saying actually that it's really a lie. It is the worst sweetener of all. But here's the problem. When we make one out to be the devil, then all others seem a little better in comparison. So it wasn't long after that that they start making real Coca-Cola with real sugar again. And now by comparison, that's promoted as almost a health food. And I'm sure while they were at it, they also throw in that it's fat-free and gluten-free. So it sounds like a real health food. So here's what we need to understand about high fructose corn syrup and sugar. Why is one a little worse and why doesn't it really matter? So sugar, again, is a 6-carbon ring, and we link that to a 5-carbon ring called fructose. And then we have the enzyme, and we split this down the middle. So now we have a glucose molecule and we have a fructose molecule. So in the body, when we do this, we start out with sugar and we have exactly 50% of each. So we end up with 50 glucose, 50 fructose. But when they make high fructose corn syrup, then they split that for us. So there's not even that 2-3 minute delay before we split this down. It's already split. So now, even though they have a little bit less of the glucose, this 45% glucose is already free floating. So it starts boosting and spiking blood sugar even faster. So typically it's the glucose that spikes the blood sugar, but even though there's less, high fructose corn syrup is going to spike it even faster because it's free. And then we have 55% of the fructose. And why is fructose bad? Because fructose doesn't spike blood sugar as much, but it is only in the liver that we can process it. So this tends to overwhelm and clog up the liver and turns into fat really fast. So we start off with a fatty liver, and then it sort of spreads out into the abdominal cavity, and it helps create visceral fat, and we get all this metabolic syndrome diseases. So that's why high fructose corn syrup is even a little bit worse than sugar. But to call one good in comparison is quite a misnomer. It's almost like you're in the Hall of Fame of mass murderers, or the worst dictator mass murderers of all time, and you're trying to argue on who is the slightly better guy. It makes no sense. One is super, super bad and the other is super, super bad. And yeah, there's a slight degree of difference, but they are both terrible. Line number 5 has to do with how they market net carbs. So if we have a nutrition label and we look at the total carbohydrates of 14 grams, we typically get to deduct the fiber. So here's 3 grams of fiber, which we can't digest. It does not turn into blood sugar. So 14 minus 3 is 11 grams of net carbs. But according to the rules of food labels, we also get to deduct sugar alcohol. So when they define net carbs, they take the sugar alcohols out, and as a result, we left with 0 grams of sugar in this product. But is that really true? Do sugar alcohols have no impact on blood glucose? Well, it depends on the type. So let's look at some of them. So let's look at some of the most popular sugar alcohols and see how they compare with sugar. So maltitol, in terms of calories, it has 67% of the calories of sugar. So it has quite a bit of metabolic impact. It also has 54% of the blood sugar impact of regular table sugar, and it tastes 75% as sweet as sugar. So it's a little bit less sweet. And therefore, when they make candy and chocolates with it, because it tastes very similar to sugar, especially in chocolates, now they need to use a little bit more. So if they use 1 1/3 as much, now we're getting the calories and the glycemic index are almost up to the same point. So it really didn't matter from a blood sugar and metabolic impact, the fact that they used maltitol instead of sugar. The only thing it's going to do is the calories, the 33% that does not get absorbed by the body, is going to feed your gut bacteria. And that's kind of unpredictable. That's why all these sugar alcohols have some upsetting effects. They work as laxatives, they cause gas, they give people diarrhea, and therefore you maybe want to use them in small quantities once in a while, but not in large quantities, and they're not like okay instead of sugar. Xylitol has 62%, so similar calories, but it has quite a bit less. It has virtually no glycemic index impact, no glycemic blood sugar impact, and it tastes about 100% as sweet as sugar. So here you could use the same amount and have still some metabolic impact, but not a lot of blood sugar. And sorbitol is another one that has the same impact on calories, but 14% of the blood sugar impact of sugar, but again, it's only 60% as sweet, so you would need to use a lot more. So most of the sugar alcohols are like that. For some reason, they get to be excluded from the carbohydrates and the sugar content, even though they act a lot like sugar still. And of course, that's why they use them the way they do and put them on the label. The fourth one, though, is erythritol. And this one is interesting because it is absorbed very differently. It's a smaller molecule, so it's absorbed very quickly into the bloodstream. 90% of it goes quickly into the blood, but it's not metabolized by you. And the 10% that go down to the gut is not really, to any extent that they know of, metabolized by the gut bacteria. So it has very close to 0% impact, and it has 2% the blood sugar impact of regular sugar. And with sweetness, it measures up well with the rest of them. So typically erythritol is the only one that I would suggest using. I don't think that the other ones are a great idea. However, I don't want to give you sort of a carte blanche or a free ride on the erythritol either, because anything that does not fit into our normal metabolism and we start consuming mass quantities, it's going to upset something in my experience. So I think it's by far the best one. I do use it once in a while, but don't think of it as something that just because it's not as bad as the others, you want to eat as much as possible. But a tablespoon or two here and there, I think you're going to be fine. An example of lie number 6 would be dried fruit like pineapple. So here we have 1 serving, which is 33 grams of sugar. Now, if they had turned this into pineapple juice and dried it out and added it to a product, now it would have to be called added sugars. But because the sugar was in the pineapple and they just concentrated it by extracting the water, they don't have to call it added sugar. But the end result is still the same. So it looks supernatural, but just like we talked about these molecules, they are the exact same molecules. You're going to get an overdose of sugar and insulin, and you're going to get into fat storing. But despite the massive deception and misinformation, there is still some hope. We're catching on. So the USDA have been saying for a while that we should have less than 50 grams of added sugar per day, which I think is a good start compared to the 126 that we're getting, but it's still way too much. The American Heart Association has taken that number down to 25 grams. And now I think it's getting close to the range where you want to be. I would probably say less than 10 grams on average, because it's not something you want to eat every day. I think it's okay to celebrate or celebrate a birthday and have a little bit occasionally, but less is definitely better in this case. But this, of course, threatens the producers of processed foods because they want to sell you a lot of food, and if they can't add the sugar, if you start having second thoughts about sugar, then they can't sell as much. So what do? Well, they learn to lie better. So now, instead of sugar, even though they have to call it added sugar on the label, they call it different things. So now they call it fruit juice concentrate or evaporated fruit juice, or they might call it brown rice syrup. I mean, we all know how good fruit is. We're told 100 times a day to eat more fruits and vegetables, and we should eat more complex carbs like brown rice. So it's got to be good, right? Well, when they turn them into concentrated fruit juice or brown rice syrup, they are pure sugar, no different. Another example would be agave nectar. I mean, that sounds so beautiful. It's almost poetic. Nectar of the gods. Couldn't possibly be bad for you. And that is basically high fructose corn syrup. It might be even worse because it typically has a little bit higher fructose levels than even high fruct corn syrup. Another name is cane juice concentrate or evaporated cane juice. And the list goes on and on. In fact, I compiled a list of another 165 different names that basically just come down to one thing. They're a different name for sugar. I'll put a link down below so you can click and go get your copy of that list so that you can stay informed of all the different things that they're calling sugar. And because these people are sometimes super smart and sometimes not the smartest, you can also count on some misspellings. For example, on some lists I found xylose with a Z, which is actually just the misspelling of xylose with an X. And then it turns out that there are actually another 2,000 brand names. So there are different companies developing registered trademarks and brand names like Lycocin, which is just another name for maltitol syrup. And there's the brand name Glucidex, which is another form of maltodextrin. And these are all, again, maltitol syrup and maltodextrin are different names for sugar. And then we have all these different brand names. And my guess is that as people get smarter and start catching on, they're just going to be more and more innovative and maybe even start using the brand names directly on the label. I don't know if they're allowed to do that, but you can rest assured that they will continue to try to deceive you. So if in doubt, just buy things where you know what's on the label. And the first rule is, if it has a label, it's probably not food to start with. because meat has one ingredient. It's called meat. Broccoli has one ingredient, broccoli. Okay? Keep it simple and you'll probably stay out of trouble. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.